How did you first get into like editing comics?
In college, I was studying journalism and writing, and at the same time, I'd been a long-time comics fan, comics reader, and I always kind of had this drive to want to work in comic books. And Chris Claremont was my big hero growing up, and I really wanted to be Chris Claremont. I wanted to write the X-Men. So throughout college, what I would do is I would send in a new story submission each week. I would do one story submission per week, and I'd send it in to Marvel, and I would get their very polite form rejection letters that would come back to me and be like, "Hey, thanks, but we're okay. We're covered." But what that did, I guess my kind of perseverance and just I didn't want to give up. The consistent submission of story ideas led to some actual real life contact with people at Marvel Comics, people who worked in the editorial department. So I was starting to get some actual feedback on my stories, which was extremely helpful to a 20-year-old aspiring writer.
Yeah.
And simultaneously, I was working at a comic book store all throughout college in New Jersey, and I was fortunate enough to meet an actual comic book artist, Mark McKenna, who was a longtime inker at Marvel and DC, and he was kind enough to hand deliver some of my stories to Marvel editors, so I didn't have to go through the actual mail.
You're getting it from two ways. You're getting it from the mail.
Exactly. So over the course of a few months, I started getting some real direct contact from people there, and then Mark, I think, was the one who suggested, why don't you try out for an internship there? And at that point, I didn't even know that they had internships at Marvel Comics. And then I checked it out with my journalism professor, and he was like, "You can get credit for that, I was like, okay, so I can get credit and I can work at Marvel Comics, and
it's amazing.
Right, exactly. And so it was a tryout process. I mean, as you can imagine, a lot of people wanted to be an intern at Marvel Comics, but the magic worked, and I found myself there at the end of my junior year for my first internship at Marvel Comics. So that's more or less how I got my foot in the door there.
And then how did you transition? Because you wanted to be a writer. How did you transition into editing?
I did. It kind of happened almost immediately. Up to that point, I certainly understood who the editors were. I was always a reader of the credits, so I knew all the names. And I think I had a general sense of what they did, but when I got to Marvel Comics and I was positioned with an editorial office, I was with Nell Yomtov, who was a longtime Marvel employee. I really learned the basics of comic book editing and everything that went into the behind-the-scenes, day-to-day routine of editorial. And I didn't want to do anything else. I immediately fell in love with it. And the fact that I was already studying a lot of editorial work in my journalism classes.
It seems like such a natural transition.
It was a natural transition, yeah. And I never gave up my desire to write or the need to tell stories. I just kind of transferred that energy towards the building of comics and the assembly of comics through the talent. And to me, that was a more rewarding experience, being involved from the ground floor of something and building it.
Because really, you get a chance to kind of come to fruition, and you get a chance to help mold it into what it becomes.
Exactly.
That's something that's really cool. A lot of people don't realize what an editor does and the importance of editors in comic books. So.
Exactly. Not to knock anyone out there, but I think a lot of people think like, oh, an editor is just making sure the spelling is okay and that things are in the right place, but it's really so much more. I mean, the editor title is actually a misnomer. It's it's a bit more executive producer
Yeah,
or showrunner or general manager type of thing, to use a sports analogy.
No, it's true. It's really true. You never know, like that editor typer. It's not someone who just goes in there and changes a typo and fixes stuff.
Right.
And so that led you to becoming the comics coach.
Yeah. So the comics coach, for those viewers and listeners who aren't aware of it, it's a side business that I set up to be to a coach to aspiring comic book professionals. So it's a place to get creative and constructive feedback on everything from actual finished comic issues that you've done, or pitches and outlines that you're trying to submit, to artwork. When I was coming up through the ranks, I was very fortunate to have some great teachers. Nell Yomtov, who I mentioned previously, he was my editor at Marvel Comics, and he was very much my mentor. He taught me everything there was to know about making comic books, from script editing to selecting talent to how to interact with talent, to word balloon placement, everything in between. And in addition to Nell, Mark Grunwald, everyone knows. Mark was executive editor at Marvel at the time, and he had a weekly assistant editor class where he would teach the ins and outs of what it meant to be an assistant editor and eventually what it would mean to be a Marvel Comics editor. And Mark had such a great spirit. He always made the classes fun, but you were really learning essential stuff about the making of comic books, how to make them the best way possible, and a lot of tradition that had been passed down in the decades since the industry was born. So these two guys, I think, were very instrumental in teaching me the basics and the ins and outs of how to put a comic book together. And the educational aspect of that, passing along of knowledge, has always been important to me and near and dear to me. At my times at both Marvel and DC, whenever I had someone new join my staff, that was one of the most enjoyable parts of it to me. It was kind of the passing down of knowledge and the teaching and the instructing. I don't think it happens enough in this day and age of comics, and that may be just because everyone's at such a frantic pace all the time. But I always try to take the time to slow down and
teach people.
And
that's beautiful, and I think it's something that's a testament to, if you talk to anyone who's really broken into comics, it's you don't realize that someone has to stop and take their time and say, this person, I have to give them some time and help them kind of break in. You have to find a working professional and kind of mirror them or learn from them and go to those panels, go to those classes and build those relationships in order to kind of make it into comics.
Yeah, exactly. And with comic books, it's such a there's a lot of people that want to be in the industry. There's only so many spots. It's not the type of thing where if you want to be an accountant, you go to college and you take certain classes. And that's how you learn to be an accountant. Working comic books is very different. People take many different paths that eventually lead towards them working in comics. So everyone's journey is a little bit different. What I do with the comics coach is I try to take into account that everyone is coming from different areas and everyone is at a different stage of their growth, a different stage of their journey. And I try to be very aware of that and accommodate people at whatever level they're at and where they're most comfortable.
So where can people find the comics coach? Like, say you want to find the comics coach, where would you go online to find the comics coach and kind of learn more about the editing things? Because you can edit at any given stage. You can edit at the inception stage, at the seed stage, or you can edit at the finish stage. Where people go to find you?
Online, it's very simply comicscoach.com. And that's a webpage set up to give people a brief look at the different types of services that I provide. And there's also a questionnaire on there that people could fill out and give me more expanded details on what specifically they have in place already or what they aspire to do. And like I said, everyone's growth period is different. So from that questionnaire, I try to assess where people are at and then give them an idea of what I could do for them.
Yeah, as someone who's gone through the process, and I'm a giant fan, it's like night and day difference. So whenever I kind of feel this sense of like growth as I'm kind of learning. I'm like, oh wow, I should have done it that way. Oh, that makes sense. You kind of like can see if you've been doing comics, you can see, oh, that makes sense. This is why I should do it this way, and it kind of gives you a sense of learning while you're going through this whole process.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the comic book creation process is a collaborative one, and working in a vacuum is never ideal.
Yeah.
But because the nature of the business and the fact that most comic book professionals are freelancers working from their homes or their studios, they may not always have the access to other creative people or other comic industry people. So that's something that I try to do. I try to provide that extra ear to listen to, eyes to look at something, second opinion, basically coaching.
Yeah.
Kind of recognizing the talents of one individual and being able to encourage the potential and guide them to whatever the next natural step should be in their creative evolution.